Available everywhere
Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast. And for our fourth segment, we have to continue to talk about college football. It's a sport I love. Yes, we're in the off season, but I still wanted to let it linger a little bit longer and talk about some really special players. Now, the 2025 NFL Draft is going to be a thrilling event. Maybe not the best draft, considering the fact that not a lot of these position groups have the best talent amongst them. But I do want to talk with the players we should be respecting even more. Guys who spurned a chance at the NFL Draft and came back, decided to return for one more year to really bolster their stock potentially in 2026. And I admire them, whether or not they're transfers, and were appealing to the NIL nature of the sport, or decided to just remain with their team, run it back. I feel like all of these guys should deserve their flowers. And no matter what happens in their final seasons, I respect them even more just because they feel like one more year gives them that chance to truly be one of the premier picks in the next year's draft. So without further ado, let's jump right into it, starting off with a big name, a guy who initially had his name in the NFL Draft, but decided to withdraw it, decided to forego it, and transfer to Miami. And yes, while it is buying into the NIL mindset, I still respect Carson Beck's decision for another year in college, because that year at Georgia didn't necessarily go the way he wanted it to. He had entered into the season as potentially the number one ranked quarterback in the 2025 NFL Draft because of turnovers, because of not necessarily a offensive identity that Georgia had assumed over the past couple of years working out. He decided to come back, and I respect that, even if he decided to transfer to Miami. He still threw for 28 touchdowns last year, so we know that the talent is there. And it's all going to depend upon, how he brings in recruits, how his name, reputation brings in recruits to Miami, specifically through the transfer portal, because a lot of his Georgia buddies might come along with him, and I think several of them have already. But I do think that moving to a school where he feels not only he's in the public eye, even more so than potentially he was at Georgia, but to give himself another chance at redemption, I feel really could work out for him in 2026. And even though there are a lot of solid QBs, Kate Klubnik and Archer Manning specifically in this class, who really could challenge him in terms of his number one status as a 2026 QB, I feel like Carson Beck earned my respect just because he understood where he stood and how he looked heading into the 2025 NFL Draft and decided to forego it and decide to play another year. So I congratulate him on that decision, because it's pretty brave to come back for another year after up and down year didn't go your way. So I'm really intrigued to see how he looks in Miami next season. Then Mikael Kamara is an interesting one, because I feel like Indiana, like I mentioned in their What's Next segment, is going to rapidly decline next season. I could see them winning 7 to 8 games, but not many more. They're going to have a tough schedule, a lot of road games against elite Big Ten talent. And Mikael Kamara coming back really is intriguing to me, because I feel like he would have been an interesting prospect for a lot of teams, but I would have had a mid-round 3, early round 4 grade on him. But ultimately, I do respect this decision just because a lot of these guys that Kurt Zignetti brought in really just came in to help him in his first year. There were JMU guys, but Mikael Kamara was not a JMU guy, and I think that's why he might have returned, and he might think that Indiana's profile could be higher than people think. He probably knows something we don't know, and he probably thinks that Indiana might have another shot at yet another CFP appearance next year. But it's going to be difficult for them. He's going to be one of the big leaders on this Indiana Hoosiers defensive line because they've lost a lot of talent on that line as well. But I do think that he is still someone who is going to play at a high motor no matter what happens next year for Indiana football. He had 10 sacks, 15 tackles for loss last year. He was first team All Big Ten. Led all Power 4 defenders in QB pressures as well. So he is still a remarkable player. But I don't necessarily think that this one is as major as Carson Beck, just because he may have lowered his draft stock by doing this. Because by playing in a semi-decent Indiana Hoosiers team compared to a CFP Indiana Hoosiers team coming out of the draft, I don't necessarily know how I will view Mikael Kamara come 2026 if I'm an NFL scout. So this was an interesting one, but I do feel like if the Indiana Hoosiers surprise again and Mikael Kamara is a big part of it, then this could have been a pretty good decision for him. So we'll have to wait and see with a guy like him. Then another QB in the SEC returning, a guy who is really weird to analyze in terms of the 2025 NFL draft, because a lot of people thought that potentially he could be one of those guys who could sneak into the round one conversation, potentially being one of, if not the NFL draft. But I think that him coming back for another year shows that he wants to develop a little bit more mature in the SEC offense to really impress scouts for the 2026 cycle, and that is Garrett Nussmeier. This one makes the most sense to me because I would not have had a very high grade on Garrett Nussmeier had he come out this year. Although he was second in the SEC in passing yards, had 4,052, tied the SEC lead in terms of touchdowns at 29. So he did have statistically a pretty decent season, but I still think there are a lot of raw traits within him that need to be ironed out a little bit, and him coming back to LSU next year really is commendable because he could have gone in this draft and potentially surprised a lot of people for where he went. But I feel like him coming back, especially in an LSU offense that is still going to maintain that high motor year in, year out under Brian Kelly, I feel like can really help him become an even more coveted option in 2026. Because right now, if he were a 2025 QB, he would not even be on my radar. I don't even think he would have been on my big board. Because while I do respect a lot of the traits that made him an SEC pass leader, he still, like I said, is a raw product who I feel like would not have matched up very well with other QBs in this class. So Garrett Nussmeier coming back makes perfect sense, and I love that he stayed with LSU, didn't transfer because he believes he can grow here, believes he can potentially lead into a CFP spot, and wants to grow tougher in this very loaded SEC conference next year. So I commend him, perhaps one of the most of any of these players, for coming back. Then Nicholas Singleton coming back is a major for this Penn State and Nittany Lions offense because I really think that Nicholas Singleton coming back makes Penn State not just a contender for another CFP appearance, but to win it all. Because they're bringing back Drew Aller, who had a much improved season in his second season in the Coach Wolnicki system. And then you're bringing back perhaps the best tandem in all of running back college football. I feel like Nick Singleton is someone who's going to steadily improve, really offers a threat in the receiving game for Penn State as well, should they continue to find difficulty in the passing game downfield with their lack of weapons. And ultimately, I feel like the fact that Drew Aller came back as well really makes this a very talented, fearsome trio in the Penn State backfield. So Nick Singleton looking to improve on 1,000 yard a year, 6.4 yards per carry, 12 touchdowns, and also 5 receiving touchdowns as well, just showing his versatility and really pairing well with Katron Allen. He's going to have a monster year yet again, and I feel like Penn State's going to have a monster year as well because of him staying. And out of all these athletes, Nicholas Singleton, if you want my honest opinion, probably if we took all of these seasons and threw them into the 2025 NFL draft, regardless of position, Nick Singleton probably would have been the highest, in my opinion. Even over a guy like Carson Beck. Even over potentially a guy that a lot of people might have liked at the QB position in this year's draft in Garrett Nussmeier. So, it just goes to show that Nicholas Singleton feels like there's more to his game than what he showed this year. And I'm really intrigued to see how this Penn State offense improves even more next year, because if Nick Singleton and Katron Allen run their game and Drew Aller has new weapons in the receiving core, look out for this Penn State Nittany Lions team next year, because I really think they're going to be something special. And the last player, another defensive guy, really going to assume a new role, a heightened role in this Texas defense. I'm really excited that he decided to return, because I feel like this Texas defense needs a vocal leader like him in their secondary next year, Michael Taaffe. And this guy has grown tremendously in the Steve Sarkisian era, perhaps more so than any other player under Steve Sarkisian. From where he was at the start of his Texas career to now, where he's coming into this next season potentially as the leader of that secondary, the lead communicator, is incredible to behold from where he was at the start of his Texas career. But he has big shoes to fill. He has to replace Barron's production, potentially having the opportunity to win a Jim Thorpe Award like his buddy Jahdae Barron. But ultimately, I feel like it was very important that Texas brought back a player of his caliber to this squad, just because when I look at this secondary, I do feel like it has room to improve. I like Malik Muhammad and Jalen Gilbo, but they were the ones who were perhaps most attacked in terms of how opposing offenses broke down this Texas defense. But Michael Taaffe is going to be the glue that holds it all together. He had 2 interceptions, 12 pass breakups last year, and is really looking to assume that Jahdae Barron role, really help out potentially some of these younger guys in the secondary, and really prove to be someone that this Texas defense can rely upon in the back end to shore everything up. Because up front, there's going to be a lot of new guys coming into the mix, a lot of new ends, a lot of new tackles coming into the mix through the transfer portal. You still have Simmons and Hill, who are very versatile players, can play at any position for you, but that secondary is what I'm going to be watching most for this Texas defense next year, and Michael Taaffe's going to be a big reason why. Can he truly fill the role of Jahdae Barron and really admirably step into his shoes as one of the most improved players in the Steve Sarkisian era at Texas? But let me know what you think about all these players coming back for another season of their college football careers, because finally, to conclude today's show, we're taking a little bit of a premature look at a top 6 preview in the Premier League. It's Man City Newcastle coming up in a couple weeks, but it's more so defined by the games that these two will be playing in the meanwhile, rather than the game itself that could make this an interesting game. We'll be right back to talk about it after this short break.